Welcome to English in Fluency. I'm your host, Alex, and I want you to think about something for a second. Have you ever been in a conversation in English, maybe with a colleague, a teacher, or even just watching a video, and you felt completely lost? Not because you didn't understand the words, but because you had no idea when the person was going to stop talking? You didn't know if they were finished with their thought or if they were about to say something more. So you either jumped in too early, interrupting them awkwardly, or you waited too long and there was this strange, uncomfortable silence. And you just stood there thinking, wait, was that it? Was that the end? Should I say something now? If that has ever happened to you, I want you to know something important. It is not your fault, and you are absolutely not alone. This is one of the most common struggles for B1 level English learners, and honestly, it trips up even more advanced learners too. The thing is, nobody really teaches you this in school. You learn vocabulary, you learn grammar, you learn how to form sentences, but nobody sits you down and says, "Hey, let me show you the signs that tell you a speaker is wrapping up." Nobody teaches you how to hear a conversation the way a native speaker hears it. Not just the words, but the signals, the patterns, the rhythm that tells you exactly what is happening. That ends today. Right here, on this episode of English in Fluency. Today, we are going to do something incredibly practical. We are going to look at real conversations between real people, with real emotions and real problems. And I am going to walk you through the exact signals that tell you when someone is finishing an idea. We are going to cover the language signals, the way sentences are structured near the end of a thought, the little words and phrases that speakers use to wrap things up. And we are going to do all of it through story and practice so that, by the end of this episode, you will start hearing these signals every time you listen to English. I promise you, once you learn to recognize them, you will never be confused again. But before we do any of that, I need you to do one thing. Right now, wherever you are, whether you are on your commute, at home, on a walk, I want you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for English in Fluency. We put out content specifically designed for B1 learners who want to move to that next level, and every episode is built the way this one is, through stories, real listening practice, and skills you can actually use. So subscribe now. Do it before you forget. And now, let us get into today's lesson. I want to start by telling you about two friends. Their names are Priya and Daniel. Priya is a software engineer who moved to a new city 6 months ago for a job. Daniel is her neighbor. He grew up in the country. He has lived there his whole life. And he is one of those people who just loves talking. He can talk for hours. Now, Priya's English is actually quite good. She studied it for years. She can read it well. She can write emails. She understands a lot. But listening to native speakers in real life, that is a different story. And Daniel, bless him, he is kind, but he talks fast, and his thoughts jump around. And Priya is always left wondering, is he done? Can I say something now? One evening, they are standing in the hallway of their apartment building, and Daniel starts talking about his weekend. He says, "Yeah, so, I went up to the lake with my brother, and we were fishing for like 4 hours. Honestly, it was amazing. The water was so clear. I haven't seen it that clean in years. And then we stopped at this little diner on the way back. This place called Ray's. It's been there since like 1974. Anyway, you should really try their pie sometime. And then he stops. He looks at Priya, and Priya freezes. She is still processing the lake, and the fishing, and 1974, and she doesn't know if that was the end, or if he is about to tell her more about the pie. So she just smiles and nods. Daniel looks a little confused. There is a pause, and then Daniel says, "So, how was your weekend?" What just happened? Daniel gave Priya a signal, and Priya missed it. Not because she was not listening, but because she had not been trained to hear it. So let's talk about that signal. Because what Daniel said at the end? Anyway, you should really try their pie sometime. That was not a random comment. That was a closing statement. And it had two specific features that every native speaker uses constantly without even thinking about it. The first feature was the word anyway. The second was the shift from talking about himself to making a suggestion that invited Priya's participation. Let's take the word anyway first, because this little word is doing a lot of work. When a speaker uses anyway in the middle or near the end of a stretch of speech, it almost always means one of two things. It either means, I got off track, let me come back to the main point, or it means, I am now wrapping this thought up. In Daniel's case, it was the second one. He had been talking for a while, his story had some nice details in it, and then, anyway, was his way of pulling it all together and landing the plane. When you hear anyway like this, especially with a slightly falling voice, that is almost always a signal that the speaker is finishing. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, Alex, but sometimes anyway comes in the middle of a sentence, and the person keeps talking. And you are absolutely right. That is why we never rely on just one signal. We look at combinations. And that brings us back to the second feature of Daniel's closing statement, the shift to the listener. After he said, anyway, he did not start a new point about himself. He pointed the conversation toward Priya. He said, you should really try their pie sometime. That is an invitation. It says, I am done with my part. Your turn. I am making space for you. When a speaker gives you an invitation like that, especially after anyway, you can be very confident that they are finished with their idea and they are waiting for you. This combination, a signaling word like anyway, followed by an invitation or a question, is one of the most powerful closing patterns in English conversation. And we are going to come back to it. But first, let's keep following Priya and Daniel because their story gets more interesting. A few days later, Priya and Daniel end up at the same coffee shop near their building. Priya is there first, and when Daniel walks in, he spots her, waves, and comes over to sit. They start chatting, and after a minute, Daniel asks, So, how's work been? You mentioned you were dealing with some stress last week. Priya takes a breath. She has actually been thinking about this a lot. She says, It's been hard, honestly. My manager keeps changing the project requirements at the last minute. Last Tuesday, we had a whole meeting where we agreed on a deadline, and then, literally the next morning, he sent an email saying we need to add 2 more features. And I just don't understand his thinking sometimes. Like, I work hard. I care about the project. But when the goalposts keep moving, you know what I mean? She pauses. She looks at Daniel. She waits. Now let's look at what Priya did there. Because she actually used several signals herself, and you might not have caught all of them. The most obvious one was the question at the end. You know what I mean? This is a phrase that does many things at once. It signals that the speaker is checking for understanding. It signals that the speaker is emotionally engaged. She is not just listing facts. She is sharing a frustration. And she wants to know if you get it. And most importantly, it signals that she is pausing and giving you a turn. You know what I mean? Is one of the most common closing invitations in informal English conversation. When you hear it, respond. Don't just nod. Say yes, or say, yeah, totally, or I can imagine, and then you can add your own thought. That is how the conversation flows. But there was another signal before. You know what I mean? Did you catch it? Go back to what she said. She said, when the goalposts keep moving. You know what I mean? Before she asked that question, she was building up an unfinished thought. She said, when the goalposts keep moving. And then she did not complete the sentence. She let it hang. And then she turned it over with the question. This incomplete sentence, this sentence that sort of trails off before it is grammatically finished, is actually a very common technique that speakers use when they are expressing strong emotion. It is as if they are saying, I could keep talking about this, but I think you understand where this is going, and I don't need to spell it out. It is a trust move. It says, you're smart. You can fill in the rest. And it is often followed by a checking phrase like, you know what I mean? Or, right. Or, does that make sense? Daniel, as it turns out, is a pretty good conversationalist, and he caught all of these signals perfectly. He leaned in slightly, he nodded, and he said, yeah, that's so frustrating. It's like you're building something, and someone keeps moving the walls. He matched her energy. He validated her experience. And now it is his turn to speak. Let's stop here for a moment, because I want to make sure you absorbed what just happened in that exchange. We saw two different close-in patterns. One from Daniel. Anyway, you should try their pie sometime, which used a transition word and an outward-facing invitation. And one from Priya, the incomplete trailing sentence followed by, you know what I mean? Which used emotional incompletion and a checking question. These are two completely different styles, but they do the same job. They both tell the listener, I am finished. You can talk now. Let me give you some more of these signals, because there are quite a few, and the more you know, the faster you will recognize them. I am going to introduce them through more moments from Priya and Daniel's friendship, because I think it helps to hear them in context rather than as a list. So, a week later, Priya and Daniel are walking in a park near their neighborhood. They are talking about a neighborhood meeting they both went to the night before. A meeting about whether or not to build a new parking structure near their apartment. There were strong opinions on both sides. Daniel brings it up. He says, I mean, look, I understand why some people want more parking. You can't find a spot on weekends. It's a real problem. But then you've got the environmental concerns, and the impact on foot traffic, and the fact that the city just doesn't have the budget right now. So, I don't know. It's a lot to think about, isn't it? That last phrase, it's a lot to think about, isn't it, is what we call a tag question. And tag questions are one of the clearest, most reliable signals in English that a speaker is wrapping up and looking for a response. A tag question is a short question that you add to the end of a statement. It's raining, isn't it? You've met her before, haven't you? "That was a good film, wasn't it?" The statement makes the point, and then the little question at the end asks the listener to confirm or respond. In Daniel's case, "It's a lot to think about, isn't it?" tells Priya, "I have shared my thoughts, I have presented both sides, and now I want your reaction. Come on in." Tag questions are also very interesting because they carry emotional signals too. When the voice goes up on the tag question, "Isn't it?" with a rising tone, the speaker is genuinely asking, they are less sure, they want your real opinion. When the voice goes down on the tag question, "Isn't it?" with a falling tone, the speaker is fairly confident they are right, and they are more looking for agreement than debate. This is a subtle thing, and it takes time to tune your ear to it. But I want to plant that seed now, so that when you start noticing it, you will know what it means. Priya, by the way, answered this one well. She said, "Yeah, it really is. I kept thinking about it after the meeting. I see both sides." And then she added her own thoughts. The conversation kept moving. That is exactly what good listening and responding looks like. Now let's look at a longer type of closing signal. Something that happens when someone is telling a longer story, not just making a quick point. Because stories have their own rhythm, and the end of a story has its own specific signals that are different from the end of a quick comment. A few weeks have passed. It is a Sunday afternoon, and Priya and Daniel are sitting in Daniel's apartment. Daniel is making pasta, badly, but enthusiastically. And while he stirs, he starts telling Priya about something that happened to him years ago. He says, "When I was about 17, I had this job at a hardware store. First real job I ever had. My boss, this older guy named Mr. Fowler, absolute legend. He used to say to us every single morning, 'You are only as good as your last 5 minutes of work.' Every single morning. And I thought he was nuts, honestly. But then one day, I was rushing to leave, kind of cutting corners on closing up the register, and he walked by and just looked at me. Didn't say a word. Just looked. And I felt it. You know? I felt what he had been trying to tell me all those months. And I think about that moment more than almost any other moment from that job. It sort of changed how I think about work. Weirdly enough. That's kind of the story. Right. That's kind of the story. What a lovely, simple, honest closing signal. Did you notice it? After everything he shared, the job, the boss, the lesson, the feeling, he ended with, "That's kind of the story." This is a very natural conversational way of saying, "I'm done. That was the thing I wanted to share." It is almost like a verbal period at the end of a long paragraph. Other variations you will hear in real life include, "And that's basically it. So yeah, that happened. And that was that. Long story short, it worked out." And sometimes, just so. Sometimes people just say "so" with a slightly falling voice and a pause, and that is the whole ending. It sounds informal, but it is very effective. Priya loved that story. She leaned forward and said, "That's a really beautiful story, actually. I feel like I need a Mr. Fowler in my life right now." And Daniel laughed, and the conversation moved into a whole new direction. Notice what Priya did. She validated the story. She made it personal, and she opened a new thread. That is great conversational English. That is B1 becoming B2. Okay, I want to take a short moment here and do something practical with you. I want you to actually do a short listening exercise right now. I am going to describe a short conversation, and I want you to listen carefully and identify the closing signal. Here we go. Two colleagues, Rosa and Ben, are having lunch at work. Rosa says, "I actually talked to the client this morning. They seemed really happy with the last update we sent. Of course, there are still some changes they want, but overall the feedback was positive. So that's good news, at least." Where was the closing signal? Take a moment. Think about it. Got it? The closing signal was, "So that's good news, at least." Let's break it down. The word "so" at the beginning of the final sentence is doing a summarizing job. When speakers use "so" to start a final statement, they are pulling together what they just said into a conclusion. It is like saying, "Given everything I just told you, here is the takeaway." So that's good news. And then the phrase, "at least." This is interesting. It adds a gentle qualification. It says, "I know there is more to deal with. Things aren't perfect, but there is something positive here." And that little qualifying phrase also signals that the speaker is not opening up a new big topic. They are placing a gentle cap on what was said, closing it off without dismissing it. After, "So that's good news, at least," the natural thing is for Ben to respond. And indeed, if Ben is a good conversationalist, he might say something like, "Yeah, definitely. Better than the alternative." And the conversation moves. Let's keep going because I want to give you as many real examples as possible. Back to Priya. She has now been living in the city for about 3 months, and she has made a few more friends through work and through a community yoga class she started attending. One of the friends she made at yoga is a woman named Siona. Siona is warm and funny and very expressive, and she and Priya have quickly become close. One afternoon after class, Siona and Priya are stretching on their mats, and Siona is telling Priya about a difficult conversation she had with her sister the week before. "So basically, she wanted me to come home for the whole month of December, right? And I love my family, I do, but a whole month is just, I have a job, I have my life here." And I tried to explain that, and she got upset, and it turned into this whole thing. We've talked since, and it's better now. But yeah, it was a rough couple of days. But yeah, it was a rough couple of days. This is a wonderful, real-sounding closing sequence. Let's pull it apart. First, we've talked since, and it's better now. This is what we might call a resolution statement. It tells the listener, the conflict I described is not still happening. We have moved past it. Resolution statements are very important because they often mark the end of the emotional peak of a story. When someone says, "and it's better now," or "we sorted it out eventually," or "in the end it was fine," they are signaling that the most intense part of the narrative is over, and we are in the wrapping up zone. Pay attention to these. Then comes, "but yeah." Oh, this little phrase. "But yeah." It is so conversational, so human, so real. "But yeah" often appears after a resolution statement, and it does a very specific job. It says, "I have told you the facts. I have told you how it resolved, and now I am just acknowledging the emotional reality of the whole thing." But yeah, it was rough. It is a final note of honesty. And after "but yeah," the speaker almost always stops. It is a very final-sounding phrase. It lands the story with a small dose of emotion, and then it is quiet. When you hear "but yeah," especially in that falling, quiet tone, that is almost always the last thing the speaker is going to say on that topic. So look up, make eye contact, nod, and be ready to respond with empathy. Priya, who is getting better and better at this, said, "I'm sorry. That sounds really hard. Family stuff is always so complicated." And Siona smiled and said, "Exactly. You get it." And they moved on. Let me now introduce you to a slightly different type of signal. One that comes not from everyday casual conversation, but from more organized speech. Because sometimes in English, in presentations, in classes, in meetings, in podcasts like this one, a speaker is not just chatting. They are delivering structured information. And structured speech has its own set of closing signals that are slightly more formal, but still very recognizable once you know them. Imagine you are sitting in an English language class, and your teacher, whose name is Ms. Harlow, is explaining a grammar point. CQT, she says, "So what we have seen today is that the present perfect is used for experiences without a specific time, for actions that started in the past and are still happening now, and for recent events that are relevant to the present moment. These three uses cover the majority of the situations where the present perfect is appropriate. So if you keep those three categories in mind, you will be able to make the right choice most of the time." Now, what happened at the end of that explanation? Let's look. First, so what we have seen today is, this is a summary opener. In structured speech, when someone says, "so what we've seen," or "to summarize," or, in other words, or "what this means is," they are beginning their closing move. They are compressing what was said into a digestible takeaway. This is a strong signal that the speaker is ending their current point. Then, at the very end, so if you keep those three categories in mind, you will be able to make the right choice most of the time. This is an application statement. The speaker is not adding new information. She is connecting the information to practical use. Application statements. So if you do this, you'll be able to, or so as long as you remember, or so that means in practice. These are closing moves. They take the content and hand it back to the listener in a useful, packaged form. After an application statement in a class or presentation, there is almost always a pause. The speaker is done with that section. Something new is about to begin, or the floor is open for questions. The more you understand these patterns in structured speech, the better you will follow lectures, podcasts, TED Talks, meetings, and any kind of English that is more organized and planned. And the great news is that once you know the pattern, you will hear it everywhere. Let me give you another exercise. I will describe a short piece of structured speech, and I want you to identify where the closing signal is. Ready? A speaker at a company meeting says, "Now, over the last quarter, we've made some progress with our customer retention numbers. We're not where we want to be yet, but the trend is moving in the right direction. The changes to the onboarding process are starting to show results, and I think if we stay consistent over the next few months, we'll see that number really improve." That's really the key takeaway from this data. The closing signal is, that's really the key takeaway from this data. This is a summary statement. It explicitly tells you that the speaker is giving you the most important piece of information, and after this, they are done. Phrases like, "That's the key takeaway." The main point here is, "What this comes down to is," and, "at the end of the day," are all explicit closing phrases in structured speech. They say, loud and clear, "I have been building toward this. Here it is. Now I am done." After that kind of statement in a meeting, you can ask a question, agree, disagree, or simply acknowledge. You would not jump in before it, because the speaker is clearly still building toward that final point. Okay, let's return to Priya and Daniel one more time, because I have one more signal to teach you, and I think this story moment will illustrate it perfectly. It is now winter. Priya has been in the city for about 8 months, and things are genuinely going well. She has found her rhythm. She has friends. Work has gotten slightly better. She and Daniel have settled into a lovely routine of seeing each other a few times a week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just passing in the hallway and chatting for 10 minutes. And one evening, Daniel knocks on her door because he smells something incredible coming from her apartment. She is cooking a dal that her mother taught her with the spices and everything. And she lets him in, and they end up talking for 3 hours. At one point, Priya is telling Daniel about how much she missed home in the first few months. She says, "I think the hardest part was just the smallness of everything. Like, in a new city, your world is really small at first. You go to work, you go home, maybe you go to the grocery store." And that was it. And I kept thinking about my mom's kitchen and the smell of it and my neighborhood where I grew up and just, I don't know. You just miss those things. Anyway, she pauses, and then, but it gets better. I can honestly say that now. And she smiles. Anyway, again. But this time, it is not followed by anything else. It is alone. Just, anyway. And then a pause. And then a pivot to something new. But it gets better. This is a very specific use of anyway as a standalone closing word. When a speaker has been sharing something personal, something emotional, and they say, anyway, and just stop, they are not inviting you to dig deeper into that emotional territory. They are gently closing that door. They have shared something real, and now they are moving on. The anyway is almost protective. It says, I have shown you something personal, and now I am stepping back. And the pivot that follows, but it gets better, is them choosing the narrative they want to leave you with. This is very human. This is very real. And if you are a good listener, you honor that closing. You do not push back into the emotional territory they just stepped out of. You follow them into the new direction they are choosing. Daniel honored it perfectly. He said quietly, "Yeah, it really does." And they sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he said, "Okay, can I please have some of that dal because it smells incredible?" And Priya laughed. And the conversation moved on. I want to spend some time now on the role of silence, because I think it is underestimated. In many cultures, silence is uncomfortable. There is a pressure to fill it immediately. But in English conversation, a brief pause after a closing signal is not awkward. It is expected. It is normal. It is the space where the listener processes and prepares their response. When a speaker finishes and there is 2, 3, 4 seconds of quiet, that is okay. That silence is not a problem. It is an invitation. Many B1 learners panic in that silence. They either jump in before they are ready and say something half-formed and confusing, or they stay quiet out of uncertainty and end up seeming unengaged. The key is to use those few seconds well. Use them to think about what you just heard. Was it a fact, a story, an opinion, an emotion? What kind of response does it call for? Agreement? A question? A shared experience? Empathy? Those few seconds are your gift. Use them. And here is something important about silence that connects back to the closing signals we have been talking about. The silence only feels right after a real closing signal. If someone is mid-thought and there is silence, that is a different kind of silence. That is the speaker pausing to think, not inviting a response. How do you tell the difference? You look at the shape of what came just before the silence. Was there a summary word? A tag question? A checking phrase? A transition word like anyway or so? Was there an application statement? Did the speaker shift toward you or toward a question? If yes to any of these, that silence after is your invitation. If the sentence seemed incomplete, if the speaker looks like they are thinking, if their eyes are cast slightly upward or to the side, they are not done. Wait, this takes practice. A lot of practice. But I promise you, the more you listen actively, not passively, the faster this becomes instinct. Active listening means you are tracking not just what is said, but how it is said. You are watching for the signals. You are feeling the rhythm. And this kind of listening is a skill you build. You build it episode by episode, conversation by conversation. Let me now give you one more extended practice moment. I am going to walk you through a longer conversation between Priya and a newer character, her colleague at work named James. James is smart and a little intense, and he and Priya have a complicated working relationship. They respect each other, but they sometimes clash on ideas. Priya knocks on the frame of James's open office door one afternoon. She needs to talk to him about the project she mentioned earlier, the one with the changing requirements. She says, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes?" He looks up from his screen and says, "Yeah, go ahead." Priya says, "So, I wanted to talk about the feature requests that came in this week. I know we discussed scope at the beginning of the sprint, and I feel like we've been drifting from that. I'm a bit worried about what that means for the deadline." She stops. She has stated her concern. She has provided context. And she has ended with a statement of worry. I'm a bit worried about what that means for the deadline. This is a soft closing signal in a professional context. It says, I have told you the issue. I have told you my feeling about it, and I am now pausing to hear your perspective. The word worried makes it personal without being aggressive. It invites a collaborative response rather than a defensive one. James leans back in his chair. He says, I hear you. And honestly, I have the same concerns. The way I see it, we have two options. We can push back on the new features, which means having a difficult conversation with the client, or we can extend the timeline, which means having a difficult conversation with leadership. Neither is great. He pauses. He raises an eyebrow slightly. What do you think? What do you think? There it is. The most direct closing signal there is, a direct question. In professional conversations especially, asking, what do you think? Or what's your take? Or how do you see it? Is an explicit handover of the conversational turn. James has done something smart here. He has presented the problem clearly. He has outlined the two options. He has been honest that neither is easy. And then he has specifically asked for Priya's perspective. When someone asks for your perspective directly like this, the floor is absolutely yours. Do not hesitate. Do not just say, I'm not sure. Give your actual thought, even if it is partial or uncertain. Priya says, I think we push back. The client relationship is strong enough. They respect us. And I'd rather have that hard conversation once than have the deadline slip and explain that. She looks at James. James nods slowly. Yeah, I think you're right. That moment, yeah, I think you're right, is worth noting. This is a very simple, clean closing signal in a dialogue exchange. When someone says, I think you're right, or that makes sense, or fair enough, or agreed. After a point you have made, they are closing that thread. The argument or discussion of that point is complete. They have landed on agreement. If you continue arguing after someone says, you're right, you are being odd, you have won, move on, okay. We are getting close to the end of today's episode, but before I wrap up, and yes, I am going to use some of the closing signals myself as we wind down, so pay attention. I want to go back to Priya's story one more time, because she has come a long way. It is now spring, about a year since she moved to the city. She is in a coffee shop with Daniel and Siona, her two closest friends in this new place. They are having a long, lazy Saturday afternoon conversation. And Priya is talking. She is telling a story about something that happened at work. She says, my manager came over to my desk yesterday, which he never does, and he said he wanted to tell me something before the official email went out. And he told me that I'm being promoted to senior engineer. Daniel's eyes go wide. Siona lets out a little scream, and Priya laughs and says, I know. It feels kind of surreal, honestly. Like, this time last year I was sitting on the floor of my empty apartment thinking, maybe I'd made a huge mistake moving here. And now, yeah, I don't know. I'm just really grateful. She looks down at her coffee. Anyway? There it is again. Anyway. That gentle, single-word door close. She has shared something enormous, and then she has pulled it back. Not because she is embarrassed, but because she has said what she needed to say. And she does not need to say more. She does not need to elaborate. She does not need to perform gratitude. She just said it, and she is stepping back. And Daniel, who has known her long enough now to understand, says quietly, that's huge, Priya. Really? And Siona reaches over and squeezes her hand. And that is, honestly, one of the most beautiful things about learning to recognize how people finish their thoughts. When you understand that someone has said what they needed to say, you can meet them there. You do not push for more. You do not pile on questions. You simply respond to what was given. And that kind of listening, real listening, tuned listening, it changes the quality of your relationships in English. Not just your grammar, not just your vocabulary, your actual human connection in this language. So, let me bring everything together now, because we have covered a lot today, and I want to make sure you walk away with a clear picture of what you've learned. We talked about transition words like anyway and so that speakers use to signal they are wrapping up a thought. We talked about tag questions like isn't it and right that speakers use to check in and invite a response. We talked about checking phrases like you know what I mean and does that make sense that carry both an emotional note and a clear invitation to respond. We talked about trailing incomplete sentences that let the listener fill in the rest. We talked about resolution statements like, it's better now, or we sorted it out, that mark the end of the emotional peak of a story. We talked about, but yeah, as a final emotional acknowledgement. We talked about summary openers like, so what we've seen is, in structured speech, and application statements that hand the information back to the listener in practical form. We talked about explicit summary phrases like, "That's the key takeaway." And we talked about silence, the beautiful, necessary, don't panic silence that comes after all of these signals and gives you the space to respond well. And we learned all of this through people. Through Priya, who came to a new city and slowly found her footing. Through Daniel, who talks too much but means well. Through Siona, who is honest about the hard stuff. Through James, who asks good questions at work. These were not just examples. These were moments that I hope felt real to you, because the signals we learned today live inside those real moments. They are not grammar rules in a textbook. They are the texture of actual human conversation. Now, here is what I want you to do. Today, after this episode, I want you to watch or listen to something in English. A podcast, a YouTube video, a TV show, anything. And I want you to listen specifically for closing signals. Not for vocabulary, not for grammar, just for the moments when the speaker is finishing. See how many you can spot. Write them down if you want. Notice the words they use. Notice the tone. Notice what comes after the signal. Do this once a day for a week, and I promise you, I genuinely promise you, your listening confidence will go up. You will feel less lost. You will start feeling the rhythm of English the way native speakers feel it. And if you want more of this kind of practice, real, story-based, practical English for B1 learners, then please, right now, subscribe to English in Fluency. Hit the bell. Leave a comment below telling me one closing signal you remember from today's episode. I read every single comment. And share this episode with someone you know who is learning English. Because this kind of content is rare, and the people who need it do not always know where to find it. I am Alex. This has been English in Fluency. You are doing better than you think, and I will see you in the next episode. But wait, I want to give you even more before we fully close today. Because we are talking about something so important and so rarely taught that I feel like I would be doing you a disservice if I stopped now. So let us go a little deeper. Let us talk about what happens in your body and your mind when you are listening to English, and why recognizing these close-in signals can actually reduce the anxiety you feel in real conversations. Here is something I hear from learners all the time. They say, "Alex, my English is actually okay. But when I am in a real conversation with a native speaker, I freeze. My mind goes blank. And I cannot figure out why." And what I have come to understand, after working with learners for years, is that a huge part of that freezing is not linguistic at all. It is not that they do not know the words. It is that they are using so much mental energy trying to track the whole conversation that they have almost no energy left to track the conversational structure. They are so focused on understanding each individual word that they miss the bigger rhythm. They miss the architecture of the conversation. And so, when the speaker finishes, it is a surprise. It comes out of nowhere. And they freeze. But here is what changes when you learn to listen for signals. You start listening at two levels at the same time. Level 1 is the words, what is actually being said. Level 2 is the structure. Where is this going? And when is it going to end? And when you listen at both levels, something remarkable happens. Your brain is no longer constantly surprised. It is constantly tracking. And when you are tracking, you are prepared. When you are prepared, you do not freeze. You flow. This is exactly the shift that Priya experienced over the course of that first year in the city. In the beginning, conversations with Daniel overwhelmed her. She was focused entirely on level 1. She had no bandwidth left for level 2. But slowly, over months of real conversations, of paying attention not just to what people said, but to how they said it, and when they stopped, she began to hear both levels, and the conversations stopped feeling like something that was happening to her and started feeling like something she was actively participating in. That shift from passive to active, from overwhelmed to engaged, that is what we are working toward here. And today's lesson is one of the biggest levers you can pull to make that shift happen faster. So let me give you some more time with these signals through short real-life moments with different people in different situations. Think of this as a listening workout. The more reps you do, the stronger your ear gets. Situation 1. A man named Theo is telling his partner, Camille, about a phone call he had with his parents. He says, "So I finally talked to them about the holidays. I told them we are not going to be able to make it this year, and they were disappointed, which I expected. But they were actually pretty understanding once I explained everything. So it went better than I thought it would." The closing signal here is the combination of the word, so at the start of the final sentence, and the summary judgment at the end. It went better than I thought it would. This is Theo drawing a conclusion. He has told Camille the setup, he made a difficult call, and he has told her the result. They were understanding. And then he closes with his overall assessment. Better than expected. Once a speaker gives you their overall assessment of a situation, they are done telling you about it. And Camille can now respond however feels right. Situation 2. A teacher named Mr. Okafor is explaining to his class why they are reading a particular book. He says, "This novel was chosen for a reason. It deals with questions of identity and belonging that are very much alive in the world today." Reading it, I hope you will find yourselves asking not just what is happening to the characters, but what it means for your own understanding of the world around you. That is what good literature does, and that is why we are reading this one. The closing signal is that is what good literature does, and that is why we are reading this one. This is a two-part closing move. First, a generalization that elevates the specific book to a broader principle. Then, a connection back to the immediate situation. Together, these two moves say, I have justified the choice, I have connected the general to the specific, and I am done explaining. In educational settings, this kind of principled closing is a strong signal that the teacher is moving on. Situation 3. Two friends, Margot and Eli, are talking on the phone. Margot says, "I just feel like lately I am moving through life really fast and not actually experiencing anything. Like I am ticking boxes but not really living. I do not know. Maybe I am overthinking it." She pauses. Maybe I am overthinking it. This is a self-qualifying close. The speaker has shared something vulnerable and then softened it at the end. This is very human. People often do this when they have said something personal, and they are not sure how the listener will receive it. It says, I know this might sound dramatic. I am putting it out there, but I am not fully committed to it being a crisis. And the signal to the listener is, I have finished sharing this feeling, and it is your turn. Eli, if he is a good friend, will take it seriously. He might say, I do not think you are overthinking it. I have noticed you have seemed kinda tired lately. That response shows he heard not just the words, but the feeling underneath them. Situation 4. A manager named Helena is wrapping up a team meeting. She says, "Okay." So, just to recap what we have covered today. We are moving the launch date to the 15th. The design team needs the final assets by end of day Wednesday. And Marcus is handling client communication for the next 2 weeks while I am out. Any questions? The classic professional meeting closing signal. After a recap, a direct question inviting clarification is the standard move. The recap itself signals that no new information is being added. Any question signals that the structured portion of the meeting is over. Now I want to circle back to the role of voice and pitch, because this is one of those areas where a lot of learners have the knowledge but miss the application. You can recognize the phrases intellectually, but if you cannot hear the tone that comes with them, you will sometimes still be confused. Here is the key insight. Closing signals are almost always accompanied by a falling pitch. When a speaker is finishing a thought, the pitch of their voice generally goes down on the final syllable or the final stressed word. It is subtle, but it is consistent. That falling pitch is the voice saying, "This is the end. We have arrived." Compare this to when a speaker pauses mid-thought. Those pauses are often accompanied by a level or slightly rising pitch, as if to say, "I am not done. There is more to come." This is why a tag question like, "Is it not?" with a falling tone feels so different from the same words with a rising tone. Same words, completely different signal. I want to give you an exercise for this. Find a podcast or YouTube video in English, ideally someone talking naturally, and just listen for the pitch. Do not focus on the words at all. Just track the pitch. Notice when it falls, when it levels out, when it rises. Do this for 5 minutes, and you will start to feel the rhythm of English at a level that no textbook has ever taught you. Let me also say something about English in professional settings, because many of you are learning English for work. Maybe you are in meetings, on calls with international teams, or giving presentations. The closing signals we have talked about today are incredibly relevant in all of these contexts. In video calls or teleconferences, it can be genuinely difficult to know when to speak. There is often a small technical delay. People cannot see each other as clearly. And the usual visual cues like body language and eye contact are reduced. This means that verbal closing signals become even more important. When you hear someone on a call say, "So that is essentially where we are," or "And that is the update from my side," or "Does that make sense to everyone?" Those are your invitations. Those are the moments to unmute and contribute. Missing these signals in a professional call means staying silent when you should speak, which over time can make you seem disengaged even when you are paying close attention. And there is another dimension to this. When you are the one speaking, when it is your turn to give an update or share an idea in a meeting, using clear closing signals helps your listeners follow you better. When you end your turn with something like, "So that is my main concern," or "I think that covers it from my side," or "Any thoughts on that?" you are doing your listeners a favor. You are telling them, "I am done. You can respond now." And people will think of you as a clear and confident communicator. Not because your English is perfect, but because you have mastered the rhythm of conversation. This is something that even some native English speakers struggle with. Using clear closing signals is actually a leadership communication skill that professional coaches teach to executives. And here you are learning it today. Back to Priya and Daniel one last time. It is late spring. Priya has been officially promoted. She is managing a small team now. One evening, she and Daniel are sitting on the roof of their apartment building. There is a little rooftop garden up there. Someone planted tomatoes and herbs, and it smells green and earthy. They are just sitting quietly, the way good friends can. After a while, Daniel says, "You know, when you first moved in, I thought I do not know. I guess I thought you were going to be one of those neighbors you say hi to in the hallway. And that is it." He pauses. I am really glad that is not what happened. He stops. He looks out over the rooftops. No tag question. No, anyway. No, you know what I mean. Just a simple, complete sentence, delivered quietly, with a falling pitch, and then silence. And Priya understood it immediately. She knew he was finished. She knew he had said the real thing, and that it was now sitting in the air between them waiting to be received. And she said, "Me too." Sometimes the closing signal is nothing more than a complete thought, honestly expressed, quietly delivered, and followed by silence. And the listener who is paying attention will know. They will feel it. That is what we are building toward. Not just knowing the phrases, not just passing a listening test. We are building the ability to feel English the way it actually moves, the rhythm, the pauses, the pitch, the silence, so that you can be fully present in any conversation and you will know exactly when to speak and what to say. So here is your final practice challenge. In the next 24 hours, have a real English conversation with someone in person, on the phone, online, it does not matter. And while you are listening, try to use just one of the signals from today. Pick your favorite. Maybe it is the fall in pitch. Maybe it is watching for anyway. Maybe it is listening for tag questions. Pick one, focus on it, and then let yourself respond in the moment when you hear it. Do not try to be perfect. Do not try to use every signal at once. Just pick one, practice it, and notice how it changes your experience of the conversation. One signal, one day, one conversation. That is all. That is enough to start. And if you want to build on this lesson with more structured practice, more stories, and more real English listening content designed specifically for B1 learners, then subscribe to English in Fluency and come back for the next episode. We have more coming your way. More stories, more people, more moments, more signals, more skills. Because becoming fluent in English is not one giant leap. It is 100 small ones, taken with consistency, with care, and with a little help from people who understand exactly where you are. I am Alex. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening the whole way through. That alone tells me you are serious about this, and you deserve to succeed. Keep going. Keep listening. And I will see you in the very next episode of English in Fluency. Let me take you into one more scenario before we truly wrap up, because I want to make sure you have seen these signals in enough different situations that they feel familiar and not just theoretical. This time, the setting is not a casual conversation between friends. It is a job interview. And the person being interviewed is Priya's younger brother, Kiran, who has been studying abroad and is interviewing for his first proper job at a company in an English-speaking country. Kiran has prepared hard. He knows his answers. His English is strong. But in the practice sessions he did with Priya over video call, she noticed one consistent problem. He could not tell when the interviewer was finished asking a question. Sometimes the interviewer would ask a question and then add a little extra context, and Kieran would start answering before that extra context was delivered. And sometimes the interviewer would finish the question and pause, and Kieran would wait too long, as if he was not sure if there was more coming. Priya coached him. She said, "Kieran, the interviewer is going to give you signals. Watch for the moment when their voice drops a little. Watch for when they lean back slightly, or look at you directly. Watch for when they end with a question word pointing at you, like, 'So how would you handle that?' Or 'What has been your experience with this?' Those are your green lights. And when the voice trails off slightly, or there is a complete sentence ending in a period sound, that is also your green light. If you are not sure, wait 1 second. Just one. If they do not continue, go." Kieran went into the interview, and the first question the interviewer asked was, "So, tell me a little bit about yourself, and what drew you to this particular role." He paused. Kieran waited 1 second. The interviewer looked at him expectantly. He answered, and it was good. The interview went well. He got a second round. What I love about this story is what it shows about the difference between knowing something and being able to use it under pressure. Kieran knew English, but he needed the skill of reading conversational signals to make that English work in a high-stakes moment. And that is what today is about. Building the skill, not just the knowledge. Here is another dimension of this that I want to address directly, because I know some of you are thinking about it. What do you do when you genuinely miss the signal? What do you do when you are so focused on understanding the content that you do not hear the closing signal, and you either interrupt or you wait too long, and there is that awkward moment? What then? The answer is, you recover. And recovery in English conversation is simpler than you think. If you interrupt accidentally, you say, "Oh, sorry, go ahead," or "I am sorry, were you finished?" 4 words. Totally natural, nobody minds. If you wait too long and the silence becomes uncomfortable, you can say, "Sorry, I was just thinking about that." And then you respond. Also, completely natural. Native speakers do both of these things all the time. Conversation is not a performance. It is a negotiation. And small repairs like these are a normal part of how it works. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be present, to be trying, and to have the tools to recover gracefully when things get a little messy. Because they will. Even after everything you learn today, there will still be moments where you are not sure, and that is fine. What matters is what you do in those moments. And now you have options. One thing I also want you to know is that as your English improves, and as your listening gets sharper, these closing signals will become automatic. You will not consciously think, "Oh, I hear a falling pitch and a tag question. That means they are done." You will just know. The way you just know in your own language. The way you do not think about it at all. That is fluency. That is what we are working toward. And the path to that automatic understanding is exactly the kind of practice we have been doing today. Exposure, attention, repetition, and reflection. I also want to remind you that every person speaks slightly differently. There are regional accents in English that change the way pitch works. There are personal styles. Some people are very explicit with their closing signals, and some people are very subtle. There are cultural differences in how much silence is acceptable, in how long you are expected to wait before responding. And all of this means that your listening education is ongoing. You do not master English listening in one day. You grow it over time through thousands of real moments of listening and responding and adjusting. But what today gives you is a framework, a set of tools, a new way of hearing that you did not have before. And that framework will serve you in every English listening situation you encounter from this point forward. On the phone, in the classroom, in the meeting room, at the grocery store, at the dinner table with friends. The signals are everywhere, and now you are starting to see them. I want to close today the same way I always try to close these episodes, with honesty. Learning a language is not always easy. There are days when it feels slow, when you feel like you should be further along than you are, when a conversation goes badly and you feel frustrated or embarrassed. And on those days, I want you to remember something. Every single signal you learned today took native English speakers years of natural immersion to absorb. You are learning it consciously, deliberately, in far less time. That is remarkable. That is actually really impressive. Do not measure yourself against native speakers. Measure yourself against where you were 6 months ago, against where you were at the start of this episode, against the version of you who used to freeze in conversations and did not know why. That version of you is already different, and it is only going to keep getting better. So keep going. Listen more, speak more, make mistakes, recover, try again, and come back to English in Fluency every time you need a guide, a story, and a practical skill to take with you into your real English life. There are students I have worked with who came to me barely able to follow a simple conversation. And within a few months of consistent, focused listening practice, the kind we do here, they were sitting in professional meetings and following every word, every nuance, every signal, not because they studied harder grammar, but because they learned how conversations actually work. They learned the rhythm. They learned the signals. They learned to listen like a participant, not like a student trying to keep up. And that is the version of yourself that is waiting on the other side of this work. Confident, engaged, present, speaking up at the right moment, every time, because you know exactly when your turn has come. I will be here. I am Alex, and I will see you in the next one. And the last thing I will say today is this. The fact that you sat here and listened to this entire episode, that you followed a long, story-based lesson in English all the way to the end without stopping, that is itself evidence of your growing fluency. You understood. You followed. You stayed. Do not underestimate that. It matters. You matter. And I will see you in the next episode of English in Fluency.